Hi, my name's Steve Usher and welcome to the Experienced Designers Podcast. Hello everybody and a warm welcome to a brand new episode of the Experienced Designers Podcast. So my guest today is Lisa Morris, founder of an experience design agency called XPLOR based in the USA. And in this episode, we discussed the popularisation of design thinking in HR and kind of debunk some of the myths that seem to be evolving or some of the perceptions that people may have about its role or its purpose and the opportunities that exist in using design thinking in any organisation. And just to ensure that the importance of that we just don't lose its true potential, particularly as we all seem to be very guilty at times of latching on or having some kind of FOMO where we think, we must be doing that. So very, very important topic, and certainly one that I think will definitely benefit anybody who is currently thinking about or keen to explore more about how design thinking can add value to your HR department and also your organisation. So that's it from me. Let's jump straight in and enjoy the show. And as always, thank you ever so much for listening. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to the Experienced Designers.
Thanks, Steve. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. Really excited about what we're going to chat about.
Fantastic. So let's dive straight in. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your journey and your career today. What have you been up to?
Thank you so much. Well, I've been for a long period of time in my life, I've played in the org design and org development space as a consultant and as a true professional in the corporate environment. And it's been about 10 or so years that I've entered into the world of design. I am a novice graphic designer, and that has really piqued my interest in terms of how to solve for what I would call some human problems and more specifically in the workspace. So I took a little bit of a pivot and have really entered into the design space. And my passion is really just trying to really improve the workplace and its impact on how you can improve lives through work. So that's my focus these days. I am the recent founder of a experience design and innovation firm completely dedicated to what you might call the employee experience, which I tend to kind of shy away from the word employee a little bit because I think in our world today, we're more about individuals contributing in many ways. And the title employee feels very, somewhat archaic to me these days because it's really a contract with money. And I feel like this is a bigger contract with individuals. It's about, of course, it's about the financial part, but it's also about the social contract and the psychological contract of work. So anyhow, that's what I'm doing these days. Super excited. I also have some strategic partnerships with some other organizations who are trying to focus as well in this experience space. And so we're all kind of trying to figure out how we can all come together as a community to make a larger impact.
Absolutely, and I'll be very much championing that as well. So there's definitely and hence why we're talking, no doubt. But certainly, I definitely see an emerging discipline and an emerging trend in the sense of experienced practitioners actually really kind of focusing on the employee side of things, and it's really exciting. I think it's still very early. I think certainly. I think I share your narrative, your thought around it's still trying to find our way a little bit with it. But it's a great space. And just can I just ask, how did that passion suddenly change and evolve for yourself? How did you find that when you from a design?
Well, it's kind of interesting. At the time in which that happened for me, I was actually doing HR transformation work, and what kept dawning on me was the fact that it felt so insular. Having been a consultant and then moving into corporate HR, I kind of felt like the perspective was so very different of the employees that HR was serving versus how HR thought of themselves. So in doing a lot of that work, I just always was like, well, we got to ask our customers. And people were always looking at me like, they don't know what they want. And I'm like, but they really do. So it was kind of then that I started thinking, I wonder if there's other ways in which you solve for this kind of problem. And kind of bumped into design thinking, a little bit through graphic design, but more just literally looking for, new ways to solve problems. And, course, design thinking was not introduced by me in any way. So it's many very effective leaders have come up with that. But when I saw that, I was just like, aha. And then, as I got into that space, it was more human-centered design that I actually more sort of gravitated towards because of its whole focus. And that's really where I started blending it all together, frankly. And I think it's actually I call it like more cross-disciplinary skill set and focus that really, I think, I don't know, I guess I feel like it makes me a little bit more flexible in all these different situations, and it makes for a better solution. So.
Yeah. What do you think some of the challenges are right now, or you've seen historically with HR and that perception and that kind of that disattachment, I guess, kind of internally? What do you think?
Yeah. I don't want to diss my friends in HR, because HR community a lot of work to do, and they add a lot of value.
Yeah, of course.
But I really think we in the business world, if you will, HR professionals they're in a tough position, because their role is intended to be, yes, an employee advocate, but also a business advocate, and so it does really put them in a hard spot. So I think this whole notion of employee experience for them, while it's they feel a lot of passion about it, I think the mindset that they have been in to date is what maybe limits them or creates a lot of barriers for them as we move into sort of this focus on experience in this era, because they've come from, let's be efficient, let's make sure it's all about the process and getting things done, and let's be honest, we've asked them to do more and more and more with less and less and less, and so mentality of trying to trim it down, if you will, and push it out to other people, has, I think, in many ways created this paradigm that they're in, where they're constantly trying to figure out how they're going to add value. But in many cases, I think the challenge for them is that the mindset has not shifted for them just yet.
Not just yet, absolutely. And I would just like to put on record as well, while we're speaking, and I have my podcast to do that. One of the things I'm finding quite frustrating at the moment is organizations or people really kind of dissing HR and telling everybody what they're not. They're not design led, or they're more process driven, or et cetera. And it's just like, hey, give them a break. I mean, at the end of the day, it served organizations well that HR's run in this manner, in this kind of industrial way, very process, very kind of cost orientated. And so it's just a natural evolution. And so I think, we need to kind of say, hey, how can we help them? What can we do to actually support them?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think, as all functions evolve, HR is in the same sort of place to do so, including the design field itself, right? I mean, it's ever evolving. So every profession, I think, evolves. And, I think, I do think you see more and more and more communities of HR professionals looking for new ways to solve problems. So there is no limit to, I think, the passion. But I mean, I would argue too, as a, ex-HR professional, or still HR professional these days, like when I started shifting, it was hard. You fall back to what you're comfortable with. It served you well thus far, right? So it is just, it's every, this is not rocket science, right, Steve? This is about a new skill set, so to speak. And so they're just as able, and potentially more able in many ways, to focus on experience for the organization.
Yeah, totally agree. So let's talk about this transition. Let's get into some of the kind of, I guess, some of the myths that are out there, or some of the things that you've seen that people have a certain perception, or HR have a certain perception of, either things like design thinking or employee experience. I think what's particularly interesting, there was the Hacking HR event last week, which I thought was fantastic. And those two words, design thinking, was mentioned on numerous occasions. I mean, it was a really strong theme that was coming out. And so one of the things for me is that I'm really worried about is this kind of, I don't know, bastardization or commoditization, or just these two words being kind of, it losing its true essence just because it's the next thing. And you know what humans are like? We love a buzzword, blockchain, AI, design thinking. And so, I think one of those things is, for me, in order for people to get the real value out of it, that we just need to slow down a little bit and just deep dive into it, not just see it as some kind of thing that's going to be a magic wand. What's your thoughts on that? What's some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I do have my own concerns about sort of the popularization of it. I think it's a very good thing for the world, but I also think that, just as in design, right, you could have, somebody could be doing design. The question is it bad design, good design, or great design? And we all know which one of those wins, right?
Yeah.
So it's similar to design thinking where, yeah, I mean, it's not a workshop and it's not a workshop with Post-its. It's actually the way designers think and the way that they do. And in and of itself, it doesn't create magic. It is, it's all about the quality of the application of it. And I think that in of itself takes a period of time to develop. And I think I would argue that even designers who've been designing for years continue to tinker with their application of, solving problems and in whatever context they're solving it for. So it's never like done and dusted, like as we know about the design thinking model, it's never over, so to speak. And I know that's somewhat disheartening, but it's an ever evolving thing. So I kind of worry about that. And, people say to me all the time, yeah, I went to this design thinking training program. It was 2 days and I'm certified now. And I think that's awesome that they know what it is now. Yep. But to certify somebody in 2 days, I mean, I think, for all of us, whatever our graduate programs are, those were years of studying, right, until we actually graduated from them. So that's what I worry about. I mean, we have to be cautious that we live in a marketplace where people are selling things. Of course, their objective is to make money. And so we have to be sensitive and cautious of that. So that's kind of where I am with it. I think it's a really good thing. And at the same point in time, I do have some concerns about it being, I think as you put, bastardized. I was use the example of, if I have a blister, right, on my toe or my foot because I'm running too much, I would put a Band-Aid on it, right? Of course I would, or maybe some ointment, but I wouldn't do surgery on my foot because I'm not a doctor. So I think there's a little bit of, yes, it is the designers. It's a tool that designers use as a profession that has become popularized because it adds value to business. Yes. But I think that sort of transition is what needs to be cared for.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So what would be it, just because I think you've had the benefit of both for sure. So what would be the different mindset when tackling a problem from a kind of old resource, process orientated mindset, HR mindset, to one that is more design led? How would they tackle an initial problem differently?
Yeah, I think the way that I might describe that is there isn't as much opportunity for not understanding the end result. So, for example, of course, we all want a good outcome when we're using the design process. That's, of course, the objective. But it's almost as if the answer is where they start and they back into something versus staying completely open to the fact that they have a problem to solve and the solution could be completely different than what they had thought it. So they're very sort of solution oriented, if you will, like it's got to look like this versus understanding how it could actually still achieve the same outcome but look completely different.
Yes. It's an uncertain outcome for sure.
Ambiguity is tough, right? Because they have been measured thus far on very analytical basis. Yeah. So again, I think business does them a little bit of a disservice by asking them to play, the policeman at times, but the human at times, and the business leader and partner at times. And that's a lot for any one human to sort of shift thinking and mindset on a dime. So I think that's why we ask. There's a lot there.
Definitely, and those outcomes are often the culmination of a number of failures or iterations, which sometimes can take time and requires patience and tolerance to failure.
Yeah, nobody likes that feeling, right?
Yeah, no, but it is a necessary thing. So it's yeah. And so what's in terms of the the mindset. So it kind of, some of the myths out there is kind of, design thinking mindset is a nice to have, and it's more a kind of following a process to get the results. I mean, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's lots of conversations about the fact that design thinking and maybe human-centered design is not really a process. It's really more of an approach and a mindset. I think people think of mindset as, it's not tangible, so it's easy for me kind of thing, right? I'll just move it over there. And I just needed something tangible, so give me a process. But the reality of it is, and I, for my one, I will not tell you like I'm the best designer in the world. Of course I'm not. But I think as I practice and apply more and more and more, I realize that it's the mindset that stops me from actually coming to a better solution sometimes, right? Because the mindset is, it's deeper and deeper. It's like an onion, right? Every time you practice it and you peel back one more layer, you learn more and more and more about It's like, for me, I have lots of ahas still, and it's really about that mindset, and it's the openness to kind of understanding human behavior, which is actually where my degree is in organizational behavior and human behavior in organizations, which it's funny because you kind of make a circle. You kind of always get a degree and then you stray away from it. And somehow it comes back to haunt you or please you at some point in time, which is kind of been my case. But to the topic of mindset, I think it's just that, you as you go through and you learn more, right? It's about insight and how insight helps you become better at something. And I think that's why it's hard, right? I think for some professions, particularly because of how they are measured by the organization in terms of their success, to let go in some ways of what has made them acceptable thus far, although it was a tough journey and has always been a tough journey, I think, for HR professionals, right? There's always that, have we gotten a seat at the table kind of conversation, right? Yeah. So I think a mindset is really being able to shift it, and it's hard because there's so many impressions in your memory of what has comes to date. So for me, it's the mindset, it's the continuous practice of it, and the letting go and trusting the process, so to speak. And kind of, it's almost like you can't practice empathy without being curious, and people don't always put empathy and curiosity together, right? It's sort of like, how do these behaviors how do they play together, so to speak, because they're not exact opposites of one another.
And what's just I always find it fascinating that organizations, their most captive audience in my mind is their people, their employees, the people that come into the office every single day or come to their work every single day and deliver and work. And so, but yet so little focus has actually been, historically anyway, on understanding that target audience to the level in which then you can really then start to shape things and to look at for efficiencies or look for ways to develop the experience, etc. So what's if someone was to start, say, the research phase of a design process, because even just that element of it alone is, you could deep dive into that and for many years, in the sense of learning how to research properly, gathering insights, all those types of things. So what advice would you give people in HR who are just starting out in this kind of way of working, around just stopping and actually gathering insight or artifacts and this type of thing? What would you advise them as a good starting point?
Yeah, I think I'm getting more and more sensitive to how it can feel overwhelming and sometimes feel as though organizations are spending more money doing more research. So I guess my only kind of quick tips on that would be, your talent segments are not personas. So that's just a quick one to know.
Yeah.
If you break down your entire talent population and it's based truly on segments, and it's really more segmentation, right? Based on maybe like tenure, or if it's based on the fact that you're dealing with data and analytics professionals, those in themselves are just talent segments, which have been critical to date for you to figure out where to invest or how skill sets fall into those kinds of those buckets, so to speak. Yeah. But for me, personas are different because they go across the talent segments. They're focused really on similar needs and desires and maybe experiences to date, so to speak. So for me, if I'm in HR, I would not assume I know employees' needs until I speak with them. I think the business tends to say, well, you've been dealing with these people for a long period of time, you know them. In fact, I might argue that the manager actually knows the employees better than maybe HR does because of that day-to-day interaction. So again, just understand talent segments are not personas. Make sure that if you're getting into research, you're really focused on asking the right questions, because it's the quality of the questions and the conversation around it that really is where you get the insight from.
Yeah.
And then I would say the last one is, you don't have to interview thousands of people or research thousands of people to get to, actually one more, but you don't need to do that. At some point in time, things become similar.
Yeah.
I think UX, they use like a 8 to 10 kind of.
That's right. Yeah.
But, it might be a little bit more for employees, but I think it's more because you have many differences. So think about how you can actually cover a full employee population, but also do really good cross-representation of what potentially could be different personas at the outcome. I think those are some quick tips that I would suggest. And I think the other thing just to bear in mind, and I've stolen this from other people, of course, but like, people will tell you they want something when in time they do something completely different. So getting out there and observing people in their context, and maybe asking the same question in a couple of different ways, actually helps you get even more insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Context, definitely. And in terms of, this is also, again, just some of the buzzwords and some of the things, the narratives that are coming out. So just when we talk about personas, obviously then there tends to be quite a link with journey mapping. And so again, just in terms of, how have you used them, or where have you seen some of the benefits in some of the work that you've done?
Yeah, so for me, personas and journey maps and ecosystems and whatever other tool you want to name, those are tools. They are tools. They are not the deliverable. They are not the outcome that's really going to improve the employee experience. It's the actual design that in fact does that. So I caution, a little bit around the hyper marketing of personas and archetypes and journey maps. They are designer tools. And, it's funny because I was in a conversation the other day with some individuals, and they kept talking about journeys. And I just, had to say, listen, that is a designer mindset. And that's not a customer mental model, right? People don't walk around and say, how was your journey today? Right? They really actually say, how was your experience? Right? So being very, very sensitive that we don't get lost in tools as if the tools in fact themselves are the outcomes we seek.
Yes, I totally agree. And I've also seen some great work with mainly some of the work with service designers, because there's loads of learning from the service design sector, but certainly just connecting the journeys into the KPIs that are already in the organization. So really just putting some very clear thoughts initially on the setup, particularly before you start journey mapping, around who's some of the stakeholders you want involved in that, in the creation, but also why the journey map's being designed and developed over time, is who are some of the stakeholders you want to pull in, just tactical little strategic, individuals that you think may, looking to influence, just bringing them in as part of that journey. So I think it's a great way to break down internal silos and to engage the business. I think it's a wonderful tool for that. But I think one of the things for me is then afterwards, once you get to some of the outcomes and some of the focus and looking at some of the assessment of where to spend your time, it's, connecting those outcomes back into the KPIs, basically, because ultimately within any organization you have the canvas and the landscape that's available to you. You're not going to be able to implement a whole new measurement system and all these other things. It's actually sometimes you just have to play in the playground, and with the toys you have. And so I think that's something I've seen and learned over time is just, really, really, some of the outcomes from that journey map is connect it into your KPIs, because then you can really measure and show, return on investment or outcomes or measure or improvements from the actual journey map, rather than it just becomes something on the wall, that becomes a story and a narrative, which is great, which of course I encourage, but getting it really embedded and then having it as a reference to come back to and to use over time, not just it's a wonderful thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a great point, which is, the tools themselves are valuable. Of course they are. And for the sake of either whether you're doing service blueprinting or whether you're doing journey mapping or a combination of both, the intention of that is to identify, in my opinion, it's to identify behavior in many ways, especially if it's the cross-functional team trying to focus on coming together to understand experience and to improve it. It's really also a tool that helps people understand how their behavior, unconscious or conscious, right, is really part of what needs to shift as they think about a new experience, right, or designing a new experience. And so to your point, when you have if you're HR and you've got marketing and perhaps IT and maybe even folks that represent the facilities part of it, and you're all kind of focused on trying to address a particular pain point, if you will, of the employee's experience, you begin to understand how, yes, it's the journey map that shows you the current and then where you desire to go more immediately. And it helps you understand that it's the behavior in and of itself, right, that needs to shift. And sometimes that is more difficult than creating an app, as an example, right? So if a lot of the experience involves behavior change on the part or behalf of the people providing the service, that's a very aha moment for a lot of those people in that space, sitting together and designing something new together. And there's a hell of a lot of value there, right, just in that conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. And what are there any other tools that you've come across that are really effective? May not be on the kind of the hyper marketing thing right now, but any other kind of useful tools or methods that you've come across that have helped?
I mean, they're the common ones. I just recently was speaking to a client who asked me if I could help her develop the employee life cycle because she's embarking on experience. And I said to her, why do you want to do that? Help me understand,
Great question.
To understand how to doing that. And she said, well, what we're trying to do is align people around the experience. And so I think I mentioned this as maybe a hyper tool, but I don't think it gets as much visibility in marketing as personas and journey maps, which is an ecosystem, right? Designing understanding your ecosystem. And so I think that's a great tool, frankly, Steve, because yes, it's pretty simple, but I think what it helps in many cases do, I think, journey maps are great because if you can understand their intent, you get more out of them. If you think about it as somebody walking through a process, then HR professionals generally have a hard time because they are thinking about how people walk through their process, which is, helpful at times, but somewhat it's that where that mindset needs to come into play. But with ecosystems, I think what you end up doing is truly putting the employee in the center of this what looks like a target, right? And really saying to them, what's in this space? Like the visual of it is just really actually more insightful, if you will, at times to help them understand. People think about, I'm just going to map the digital experience, or I'm going to map the physical environment. Well, it's so important to understand that all of that is happening at the same time. I'm actually sitting in a chair in the physical environment, interacting with a digital tool that might be Workday or something that's more, work oriented. And I'm also in the process of trying to achieve a need. So what ecosystems do, at least in my opinion, is they bring all of that together in one picture. And it is overwhelming. I don't doubt that, but that's the world of the employee. They live in a pretty overwhelming space on a day-to-day basis. So there's the empathizing, there's the understanding of how the functions need to come together, right, to support one employee in the context, which is made up of a lot of different things. And, in other tools, I feel like we isolate the reality. versus understand the reality of all the things coming together at the same time. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah.
It does.
So I find that to be a very useful tool, because that's where the functions understand, maybe not tactically what they need to do, but how what they do in fact shapes that ecosystem, right? Which is really a bunch of, hidden and visible relationships that shape experience.
Yeah. So let's jump into another topic. I just want to maybe just get your input on, if that was okay. So let's talk about the HR function, because I think we've covered quite a bit around the those that work within HR. So how do you see it evolving over, dare I say 10 years? I mean, I don't know what's happened in the last 10 years, and then let's fast forward another 10. It's just phenomenal. But because it's changing. I mean, organizational structures, I mean, perhaps just pulling on some of your org design background, I mean, there are definite shifts happening. And so, I think we've got, situations where there's, I think, what is it, five generations, I think they're saying now, in the workplace. I love this, I can't remember who coined it, but it's a brilliant example of the silver tsunami, which is, people, how do we capture or involve or not lose that knowledge, because ultimately people are living longer, working longer, and so there's this kind of really interesting dynamic within the workplace. But fundamentally, I think HR's got a huge part to play, I think, in the future of this and the future of work and organizational development. So where do you see, what's your thoughts around where it's heading as a function? Where do you see things moving away or coming in or evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I've put a little bit of thought into it, but probably not as much as I'd like. I think a lot of it is going to be, they are the, apologize for that background noise. They are the, I think they will soon, I hope that their role becomes more clear, or at least they define a clearer role. So I think as I kind of entered this conversation, I think the tug of war with them is that they're asked to fill multiple roles. So I'd love to see them come to terms with what their role is and stay put for a while. And I think that role could actually be, the orchestrators of the employee experience. And I chose orchestrators for a reason.
Nice.
I think, helping them understand, how everything they do, the way they think and the way they work, has an impact on the employee's experience, their own experience, frankly, as HR professionals as well, will become, I think, more clear for them if that's the focus for them. Mm-hmm. I think, less distraction on what's the next best, tool, not to take away from the providers of like Workday and everything else or ServiceNow, but I think those organizations are sort of moving forward with a solution. And I think HR needs to be what I would call a little bit wiser in some regards with respect to the fact that that's a part of the experience, but in and of itself, it is not the experience. So beginning to think about, when I did a lot of HR transformation in the past, it was much more like life cycle and processy. What I'd like to see HR is more about services and products and opting in and opting out. So allowing opting in and opting out to their own services and products, because I think the shift that needs to happen is that an HR process in and of itself is for HR. It is not for the employee. Let's devise, if you will, a new world where we are delivering solutions or services and products to employees because they find value in them, less about the fact that it's a compliance-oriented, we have to have you do this quote-unquote service, which is really a process, so we can decide what we're going to pay you, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It feels a little awkward at times. So I think the shift is about HR really being, a marketplace itself, where they offer valuable services and products, and there may just have to be some dissection, so to speak, where there is a need for compliance. I understand law, and I understand that there are people who still make maybe some poor decisions when it comes to behavior. Yes. But is that really the future of HR? Or HR, maybe that should maybe maybe we should come up with a new function, which is about compliance and legal matters. And that's really not HR shouldn't play in that space, and HR should play in a different space, which is to help organizations orchestrate better employee experiences. And that's where we get closer to psychology and human and well-being and things of that nature that aren't at complete odds with compliance-oriented matters. So for me, it's a bit more of kind of becoming a better service provider, so to speak, and getting clarity on the fact that the role maybe is too many hats and therefore doesn't allow you to be effective.
Yeah, I think some of the streamlining is perhaps coming their way with, when you look at it from a service design perspective, I think some of those, services are being much more kind of consumerized internally. And so, I'm hoping that some of that will pull away some of those elements that HR been involved with. Not that won't be huge amounts, but it's certainly going to be in terms of the interactions internally and how employees interact with HR. There's going to be a portion which will be easily removed and put through into technology.
I think if they're able to shift their mission to something like delivering great experiences,
there it is. Mm-hmm.
And then they help the organization understand what that means versus maybe some of the work that they do today. And, we always start to shift work, right? Whether it's HR work or our own work on a day-to-day basis to something that is the right place for that work at the time, right? So, I think there's great opportunity in the future for HR to get clear on its role and really shift work that's really not about the experience they want to create, to another function, so to speak, that is, maybe not experience driven, but, helps organizations stay structured to a point where they're not, inviting risk and they're dealing with law situations as they should. Yeah, indeed. And so so that's the function. So where do we see what do you see in 2020? What do you see perhaps some of the trends into next year? Is there anything that you've seen or you've got some belief around for next year? Yeah, I have seen, what I've really enjoyed seeing is that some of the HR shared services functions these days are really moving towards a service experience kind of mentality. So I've seen a lot of that happening, which I'm really excited about that, right? Because they're literally beginning to understand, what used to be, a remedy system and still exists today, maybe replaced by things like ServiceNow, isn't in fact going to change anything but what's really going to change it is how that particular touch point is embedded in the larger experience. So I'm seeing a lot of that come to life, and the use of service design, which I actually, as mentioned, I find that to be extremely valuable for HR professionals to think about that. And, there's lots of popularity on design thinking and journey maps, although we both know, right, that a journey map and design thinking, they're not the same thing. So, I think we'll see more understanding about what is a human experience, right? And which has nothing to do with design thinking, right? And then how do you use design thinking to actually enhance, improve, innovate that experience? So those two tools, more clarity around those. Yeah. I think HR operating models will also get a little bit more clear on this conversation of who owns employee experience, which in my world, I don't know that I don't think HR owns it. And I don't want to say everybody owns it because that feels like everybody owns culture. So it's the same rhetoric over again. But I also I worry that, I guess as I think about the future, this is not about an initiative. This is about a new way. Yeah. It's a new way. So it's not like how do you, ride a bike and chew gum at the same time kind of thing, right? It's really more about how do you stop doing one so you can do the other, if you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And so I see a lot of those themes just growing over the next year and still another few years of education. I mean, there's a lot of organizations I interact with that understand, they're beginning to understand design thinking even just now, like I never heard design thinking, or, yes, I've heard of employee experience, but I think about it this way versus, I'm not suggesting that there's ever a right way, but it's obviously one element of it as opposed to the holistic focus on it. So I think these tools are going to grow in understanding and grow in popularity. And I think just the, I guess, experience, understanding is also going to grow, because I think, I'm not the first person to say this, but I don't know about you, but I almost now evaluate a lot of my day-to-day interactions by the quality of those interactions, whether it's conversation with Steve Usher or a hotel room stay or, a Uber ride. So I mean, maybe it's because I do this for a profession, but I evaluate everything on the experience, the quality. But I think, as we all know, humans these days are starting to value that more over things, so to speak. And so I think that's just how we're all gonna evolve. And I think that's gonna push HR. And I frankly think HR will finally, I hope, and I pray sometimes that HR can actually become that, because I think they'll find their own jobs much more fulfilling as well.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree. And I think also, just to add, and I know you've read and absorbed some of the learnings from the experience economy with Joe Pine and Gilmore. I actually had lunch with Joe Pine last week, which was fantastic. It was lovely to meet him, and he's had a big impact on my direction and career for sure. Something which just continues to kind of think is that this whole thing around experience design is that we've just also, just as kind of HR are still getting their head around the narrative around some of the methods and some of the focus around employee experience design or experience design, it's also just ensuring that there's a real distinguish between what's service design, so making it quicker, easier, faster, cheaper to engage with customers, or in this conversation, employees, to time well spent. And so, I think that's something as well I'm going to continue to really champion, and certainly through some of my keynotes that I've got lined up for next year is really distinguishing between that and really ensuring there's a real difference between it. There's a very different focus, and there's a very different way in which you design for it and stage it. And so, that's something which I see as well, certainly for next year.
Yeah, I too am a huge fan. I was actually inspired by your mention to me that you were going to get to meet him in person, and of course, quietly jealous. But I was listening to a podcast he had done, and I think that time well spent is a great way to almost evaluate not only the experience, perhaps, but even the function providing the experience, which is, do people feel like their time is well spent engaging with my services and products, right?
Yeah.
And at every interaction, the question is this touch point worth it, or is it just a touch point for the sake of a touch point? And the same with the interaction, which is sort of the conversation I was having with a lot of professionals last week. They were talking about their process, and the question I kept saying, do you need that? And they were like, what do you mean? And we need that. And I was just like, well, again, does the employee need that? And it was kind of a funny conversation, because they kept saying, of course they need it. And I said, well, show me some evidence that tells me they need it. And they gave me the look like, we can't. And I was like, that's the question you need to be asking yourself. Yeah. Is it for you or is it for them? And is it for you? Is your time well spent? Is it for them? Is the time well spent? Because the evaluation of experience, whether you want to call it effortless or seamless or all the other words, right? Simple and easy and usable and accessible, blah, blah, blah. Those two are not always mutually exclusive with valuable as well. So it's like, okay, can something be simple and valuable? Answer yes. Start thinking about how those combinations push you to think about how they might exist together or how they may not be able to exist together. And so you're designing for a whole different characteristic, so to speak.
Yeah, agree. Brilliant. And just in terms of any recommendations of any kind of, I don't know, research or books or anything that's had an influence on you, or you'd recommend to people out there, just to start kind of broaden the perspective?
Yeah, there's one book that I'll probably mess up the author's name, but it's called Orchestrating Experiences. And of course, it's not about the employee experience, although there's quite a bit of mention in it, because obviously there's a huge connection between a great customer experience and a great employee experience. But it's called Orchestrating Experiences, and it's written by Chris Risden and Patrick Quattlebaum. And awesome. The most, I think, interesting part about this book, frankly, is it unpacks, deconstructs, however you want to think about it, down to what is actually a moment of interaction, right? It's interesting because people, I think, tend to confuse a touch point and an interaction, and they say it's the same thing. And these folks have a really good approach to actually distinguish the two and break it down to in my world, it was sort of when I first entered it was like the terms were changing and everyone was using a different term, and they still are today. But I kind of felt like this was a good Bible for me. I was just going to read this one. I'm going to stick with it because I know these folks. I've seen their work, and you have to, at some point in time, stick to something to progress, right? So I feel like Orchestrating Experiences is a great way to understand the difference in, from an experience design perspective, and then how you can use design thinking as your methodology, so to speak, or approach to actually, to pull. And design thinking, as you know, it's just this big. Certainly, it's got an approach, but it's also the more valuable piece in many ways can be how you use different tools to achieve different things. And I think being able to understand what you were truly trying to achieve in the stage of the approach is just as critical as the tools you choose.
Absolutely. I'm so glad I've connected with you, Lisa. I know we had a fantastic conversation a few weeks ago, and it was it's been so great to meet you and just to chat further, because I think we had a lot in common around how we saw the world and HR, look forward to collaborating some more in the near future, I hope. So we've got some ideas which we're exploring, and let's see where that takes us as well.
Yeah, super excited. And again, just so honored to be on this. I think it's just amazing that you've created a podcast completely focused on EXD, because there's a lot of focus, on other elements, and it's just great to see one out there. And I think these hopefully help to bring understanding and to share points of view. Never right, never wrong, just a different point of view. And that's, I think, where the beauty kind of comes from. So thanks so much for having me. And I really look forward to our fun partnership to be in the future as well.
Yeah, look out for that, people. So look, thank you so much. And thank you for your kind comments as well. It means a lot, because it's, you just start off as I don't want to use the word side hustle, but you start off with it as a bit of fun project, and all of a sudden you end up with thousands of listeners, and from God knows how many countries, and it's like, wow, okay, this is really cool. It's continuing to grow. So I just want to be part of the movement and to share out really good knowledge and share great people to the world. So so thank you so much. Thank you.
And there you have it, another episode of the Experienced Designers podcast. Thank you so much to my guest, Lisa. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to record the pod. And of course, if you wish to connect, all of her details, as well as details relating to any of the books and resources we mentioned in the show, will be in the bio as normal. So if you like what you hear, please do rate, share, print a t-shirt, do whatever's necessary to amplify the Experienced Designers podcast. It really does go a long way. And as always, thank you ever so much for listening. And until the next time, bye for now.